Scary Deep Woods Stories, The Mirror's Curse. The rain had begun to fall as Eliza drove past the battered wooden sign, barely visible through the creeping mist. It read, "Welcome to Grimsby Hollow," in chipped red letters that bled into the gray morning fog. Her tires crunched over gravel and fallen branches as she navigated deeper into the woods, following the narrow path she had discovered in her grandmother's diary. An entry scrawled decades ago in frantic, looping handwriting, warning her descendants never to return to the hollow. Eliza had ignored the warning. She was a skeptic. Paranormal tales had never moved her beyond mild amusement. That is, until the dreams began. For the past 6 weeks, she had awoken every night at exactly 2:44 a.m., covered in sweat, heart pounding, with the same echo ringing in her ears, a child's voice whispering her name from within the trees. Her therapist said it was stress. Her sister said it was grief from their grandmother's passing, but Eliza knew something was pulling her, calling her. The deeper she drove into the woods, the weaker the GPS signal became until it vanished entirely, leaving only the pulsing red dot of her destination. Ashmore Cabin. The forest swallowed her car, thick trees leaning in as if to whisper secrets she couldn't hear. Something about this place felt wrong. The silence wasn't silence. It was the absence of life. No birds, no wind. Only the low thrum of her tires and the occasional creak of something shifting in the distance. She parked beside the remains of a rusted gate barely hanging on its hinges. Beyond it lay a trail littered with bones. Animals, she hoped, and broken dolls with their eyes gouged out. She hesitated but pressed forward, clutching the diary like a shield. Her boots squelched through the mud as she made her way to the cabin. The building loomed out of the fog like a wounded animal. Its walls were warped and blackened, the windows veiled in grime and streaks that looked disturbingly like claw marks. She stepped onto the porch, the boards groaning beneath her weight. The door creaked open with a push, revealing a stale darkness that smelled of rot, damp wood, and something metallic. Inside, dust danced in narrow shafts of gray light that pierced the boarded-up windows. Furniture was overturned, and in one corner sat a child's rocking horse that moved ever so slightly without being touched. Eliza's heart pounded. She checked the diary again, flipping to the last entry her grandmother had written. It described a hollow beneath the floor, a place where the lost ones sing. A chill ran down her spine. She found the rug mentioned in the journal and peeled it back. Underneath lay a trapdoor with a rusted iron ring. The wood around it was blackened, as if scorched, and strange symbols had been carved into the planks. She pulled the ring. The trapdoor resisted at first, groaning like a wounded animal, but then sprang open with a sharp snap that echoed through the cabin. The air that wafted out was colder than ice, filled with the scent of something ancient and dead. A narrow staircase descended into complete blackness. Eliza lit her lantern and began the descent. The stairs creaked beneath her, and the deeper she went, the more oppressive the darkness became. The air felt thicker, heavier, as if time itself was slower down here. At the bottom, she found herself in a narrow tunnel made of stone and roots. The walls were slick with moisture, and something moved just out of the corner of her eye. She turned the lantern, but there was nothing. She moved forward. The whispers began as soon as she passed the archway etched with runes. Faint at first, then louder. Dozens of voices, some crying, some laughing, some screaming. Her name was among them. Eliza! The tunnel opened into a chamber that looked like a forgotten church. Rows of decaying pews faced a stone altar covered in dried blood. Behind it, a massive mirror, cracked in weeping black fluid, pulsed with a dull light. She approached the mirror slowly, compelled by something unseen. Her reflection was wrong. It moved when she didn't, smiled when she frowned. Then it opened its mouth and screamed. Eliza stumbled back, the sound deafening. The chamber shook. The ground split. From the cracks emerged hands, dozens of them, pale and thin, reaching for her, dragging themselves upward. She turned to run but collided with something tall and solid. Looking up, she saw a figure in a dark cloak, its face hidden beneath a veil of shadow. "You were warned," it hissed, voice like gravel and fire. "But you didn't listen." It raised a hand, and the world around her shattered like glass. She awoke on the cabin floor, gasping, clutching her lantern, which had burned out. The trap door was closed. Her hands were covered in dirt, and her clothes were damp with sweat and blood. Was it a dream? No. It had left a mark. Burned into her palm was the same rune from the tunnel entrance. The diary was gone. Outside, the wind had picked up. Whispers danced through the trees. She tried to start her car, but the engine wouldn't turn. Her phone had no signal. She was alone, or so she thought. From the edge of the woods, the same child's voice from her dreams floated to her ears. You came. Now you can never leave. She turned and saw the figure from the mirror watching from the trees, motionless, waiting. And behind her, the cabin door creaked open once more. It was only the beginning. The whispering didn't stop after nightfall. Eliza sat inside the cabin, her back against the splintered door, every light she could find burning in a desperate halo around her. The lantern, a half-melted candle she'd uncovered in a drawer, and even the flashlight on her nearly dead phone flickered dimly against the encroaching darkness. Outside, the forest had changed. No longer a maze of gnarled trees and silence, it now pulsed with faint, rhythmic rustling, like something breathing, slowly and steadily, beneath the moss-covered floor of the woods. The figure that had watched her from the trees had vanished, but the unease it left behind grew like a sickness in her chest. Each time she blinked, she imagined seeing its outline in the shadows or reflections. Her thoughts felt foreign, echoing with words she hadn't spoken but could hear clearly, telling her to go back into the hollow, to descend again, to look deeper. Sleep came eventually, but it was not restful. She dreamed of bones arranged in perfect spirals, mouths stitched shut, and eyes carved into tree bark. She saw her grandmother as a child, dragging a doll with its head missing, whispering warnings Eliza couldn't hear. She awoke with blood beneath her fingernails. Something had been in the room with her. Dust shifted in shapes too large to be rats, and an oily handprint stained the window pane, smeared from the outside. She grabbed her lantern and stepped out onto the porch. The fog was thicker now, pressing against her skin like wet cloth. The trees whispered in voices too low to understand. Then came the sound, a faint clink of metal on stone, from behind the cabin. She followed it, against all logic, down a narrow path choked with thorns. At the end was a well she hadn't seen before, ancient and covered in ivy, the wooden frame rotten and splintered. Hanging from the rusted winch was a bucket wrapped in chains. Her breath misted in the cold air as she stepped closer. A single drop of blood hit the rim of the well and vanished into the black below. She hadn't noticed the cut on her finger. The well groaned. A sound rose from its depths, something crawling upward, metal scraping against stone, breathless and eager. Eliza turned to run, but the forest had closed behind her. Trees now bent in strange ways, roots curling up like skeletal fingers. She sprinted through the brush, branches tearing at her clothes and face, until she saw the cabin again. But it was different, darker, taller. A third window had appeared on the second floor, one she knew hadn't been there before, and behind it a silhouette stood perfectly still. She froze, heart hammering, and then the window went dark. Inside, the mirror she'd seen in the hollow now leaned against the far wall, though she'd never brought it up. It dripped slowly onto the floorboards, black ichor staining the wood. As she stepped closer, her reflection split in two, one part smiling, the other screaming silently. She turned away and saw something worse. Carved into the walls, above and around the windows and doors, were hundreds of names scratched into the wood with fingernails or dull knives. Her own name was the freshest, still wet. She ran to the diary, somehow returned to the floor where she'd dropped it the day before, and flipped through it in a frenzy. New pages had appeared. They were blank except for a single phrase repeated over and over. She let them in. The lights in the cabin died one by one, as if swallowed. The silence grew thick, heavier than before. Something began to knock. Not at the door, but from under the floorboards. A slow, deliberate tapping, like fingers on glass. She backed away, but the knocking followed her from beneath the floor as she moved. It stopped when she reached the fireplace. Something told her to look up the chimney. Against every instinct she did. A face stared back, pale, mouth open too wide, eyes like polished coal. It grinned and whispered, "You're home!" She screamed and stumbled back, but the face was gone. She searched the cabin and found an attic door in the ceiling she hadn't seen before, half hidden by shadow and dust. She pulled the cord. The ladder dropped with a clatter, and a gust of freezing air spilled out. As she climbed, each rung of the ladder felt like a heartbeat. The attic was massive, far larger than the footprint of the cabin. It stretched on forever, filled with antique cribs, broken toys, and cages. At the far end stood a wardrobe, its doors rattling as if something inside was desperate to escape. She approached and opened it. Empty, but the inside was lined with mirrors, dozens of them, each reflecting a different version of her. One was crying, one was covered in blood, one was mouthing words she couldn't understand. Then one began to pound against the glass. Cracks splintered across the mirrors, and a shriek filled the attic, not from the wardrobe, but from beneath the floor. She turned and fled down the ladder, only to find that the cabin had changed again. The walls were pulsing, alive, covered in veins and patches of hair. The mirror was gone. In its place stood a doorway made of bone and ash. She stepped through and was back in the tunnel, though she hadn't gone near the trapdoor. The air was thicker than before, vibrating with unseen movement. The altar in the chamber was covered now in fresh offerings, teeth, small shoes, and a lock of her own hair. She hadn't cut it. Something had. She turned back, but the doorway was gone. Footsteps echoed behind her. Not one set, many, dozens. The whispers returned, and now she could understand a few of them. "We remember. We wait. You belong." A light flickered ahead, and she saw the figure in the cloak again. It stood beside another person, someone smaller, a girl, the child from her dreams. The girl lifted her face, and Eliza gasped. It was her grandmother, young and terrified. "You brought them back," the child said. "You brought them all back." Behind them the stone cracked open, and a shape began to rise, massive, writhing, made of limbs and screaming mouths. The hollow had awakened. The thing that rose from the cracked stone was not made for the eyes of the living. Its body defied shape, composed of limbs that bent wrong and faces that sobbed from its flesh, mouths gasping but producing no sound. It dragged itself upward like a colossal marionette jerked by unseen strings, and as it did, the chamber shook with a groan so deep it rattled Eliza's teeth. The child, her grandmother's younger self, backed away, eyes wide with terror, while the robed figure placed one skeletal hand on her shoulder as if comforting her. But Eliza saw clearly now that the figure wasn't human. Beneath the folds of black fabric were bones held together by ligaments of shadow, and when it turned to look at Eliza, it had no eyes, only pits from which ash poured slowly like black tears. "The door is open," it said in a voice that sounded like wind through graves. "You broke the chain." Eliza didn't understand, but something ancient inside her did. Memories not her own rushed into her head, flashes of rituals in this same hollow, women in bloody dresses chanting beneath moonless skies, and always, always the same phrase whispered through time. The hollow must be fed. She turned to run, but the stone path behind her had collapsed. The chamber began to change. The altar cracked in half, spilling dark fluid, and from it grew roots, pale, veined things that lashed out like tentacles, searching the ground. One brushed against her ankle, and her vision filled with images. The inside of a coffin, her own face, dirt piling above her. She screamed and tore herself away, stumbling toward a tunnel newly revealed by the shifting walls. The child and the robed figure remained behind, watching. As she fled down the corridor, the screams began, not from behind, but within the walls. Dozens of voices cried out in agony, pleading for help, repeating names, some of which Eliza recognized from the scratched cabin walls. The tunnel narrowed, the air thick with dust and age. Her flashlight flickered, dimming with each step. Then it went out completely. She stood in pitch black, trembling. That's when she heard breathing. Not hers, something slower, deeper from only inches away. She held her breath and waited. The breathing stopped. A whisper brushed against her ear. "They buried me alive." She spun around but saw nothing. Then hands grabbed her from behind, cold, brittle hands that dug into her shoulders and tried to drag her backward. She kicked and screamed, flailing blindly, her fingers finding the jagged edge of a rock. She swung, connected, and the hands vanished. She crawled until her fingers brushed wood. A door. She shoved it open and tumbled out into a hallway, long, rotted, lined with portraits. It was inside the cabin, but not as she had known it. This was an older version, preserved in decay. The walls were warped, papered with peeling wallpaper that bled rust-colored streaks. The portraits moved slightly, not just eyes following her, but heads tilting when she wasn't looking. She stood and walked slowly. At the far end was a mirror, the same mirror from before, now suspended in midair without a frame. As she approached, her reflection stepped forward independently. It grinned and raised its hand, palm pressed to the glass. But Eliza had not lifted hers. The reflection mouthed something. "Let me in." The mirror cracked and bled. She turned and ran into the next room and stopped cold. She was in the living room of her childhood home. The same rug, same clock ticking loudly. Her mother stood in the kitchen humming. "Mom?" Eliza whispered. Her mother turned. Her face was wrong, stretched, the mouth too wide, the eyes black pits. She opened her mouth and screamed a sound like screeching metal. Eliza turned again, and the door behind her was gone. The walls melted and reformed into forest. She was outside now on Ashford Lane, but it was night and every house was abandoned. Windows shattered, trees dead, the pavement cracked open like broken bones. She walked slowly, streetlights flickering overhead. In one house, a girl stood in the upstairs window staring down at her skin pale and her eyes hollow. In another, a man crawled across the ceiling, twisting his neck to follow her movements. She broke into a run and came to the old church. Its steeple was bent, the bell silent. Inside, rows of pews had been replaced with cages. Children sat in them, unmoving. Some whispered prayers, others just stared. A priest stood at the altar with no face, blood pouring from his sleeves where hands should have been. He turned toward her and said, "You brought the hollow back. They all must return." The floor cracked, and she fell through, down into water. She sank into freezing darkness, the pressure crushing her lungs. Hands pulled at her ankles, mouths kissed her knees. Voices filled her head. "Come back," they chanted. "Feed the hollow." She burst upward, gasping, but she wasn't in water anymore. She was lying in the cabin's bed. Morning light poured in through the cracked window. The diary was beside her. The pages had changed again. Now they told the story of everything that had just happened. Every detail. The last sentence read, "She wakes again, but it's never the same morning twice." Her phone buzzed. A text message. Unknown number. It said, "Are you alone?" Then another. "We are here." Then a third. "Look outside." Eliza stood and looked through the window. Dozens of figures stood at the edge of the woods, motionless, waiting. All wore the same expressionless wooden masks, carved with hollow eyes and stitched mouths. She backed away. The phone buzzed one final time. "You let us in. Now you let us out." And the mirror behind her began to hum. Eliza's breath caught in her throat as she slowly turned from the humming mirror. The surface pulsed with a deep red glow now. No longer reflective, but a living, writhing membrane. It throbbed like a heartbeat, and each pulse echoed in her ears. The mirror's hum deepened into a voice, a low growl that didn't speak words but intentions, old and hungry. The figures outside remained still, a silent audience beneath the gray dawn, their wooden masks all tilted slightly in unison, as if listening too. Her phone buzzed again. She glanced down with trembling hands. This time, a photo appeared. It showed her standing in the window, taken from the tree line where the masked one stood. Another photo arrived, this one from inside the cabin behind her shoulder. But she was alone. She spun, but the room was empty. Then the mirror screeched, a sound like glass splitting underwater, and a fissure appeared down its center. Hands, pale and long-fingered, began to press through the crack, as if emerging from inside the glass itself. Eliza stumbled back and ran for the door. It flung open before she reached it. Outside, the masked figures had moved. They were now halfway up the path to the cabin. They didn't walk so much as glide, their feet never lifting, their arms perfectly still. She bolted into the woods, snapping branches as she ran, heart hammering. The air thickened again, as it always did in the hollow, the trees pressing inward. She didn't know where she was going, just away, but the woods shifted like a maze around her, and suddenly she was in the Ashford Cemetery, the one from her childhood nightmares. Rows of tombstones curved into impossible angles, names scratched out or replaced with phrases like, "the first offering," or "she sang in the soil." At the far end was a new grave, fresh dirt, a wooden mask lay on top. Her name was carved into the headstone. Eliza May Halbrook, born screaming, died feeding. The ground beneath her feet began to sink, not like it was collapsing, but like it was pulling her downward. She tried to move but couldn't. Roots curled around her ankles. Then she heard music, a lullaby, off-key, sung in a child's voice. She knew it. Her grandmother used to sing it. It echoed through the cemetery and silenced the birds. A figure appeared at the tree line. A child in a white dress, holding a doll missing its face. "You came back," the girl said. "Now it begins again." The child pointed and the graves began to open. Not quickly, but deliberately. Dirt falling in perfect clumps as skeletal hands reached up and pulled their owners out. Dozens of them, each one missing a face, just smooth skin where eyes and mouths should be. Eliza screamed and tore free from the roots, running blindly through the forest, branches slashing at her arms. She came upon the church again, but now it was burning. No fire, just black smoke rising from its windows. The bell tolled once, then again, a third time. Each chime brought a stabbing pain behind her eyes, like needles being driven inward. She collapsed to her knees just as someone stepped out of the smoke. A man, tall and thin, wearing no mask, but his face was blank, like the others. He tilted his head, listening to something only he could hear, and extended his hand toward her. Carved into his palm were the words, "the guide." He didn't speak, but Eliza felt compelled to follow. She rose, her body numb, and walked with him through the smoke. Inside the church was no longer pews or altar, just a spiraling staircase descending into pitch black. The man pointed down. Eliza hesitated, then descended. The air thickened with rot. The walls dripped with something dark and warm. As she moved deeper, she began to hear her own voice echoing ahead of her, repeating things she had never said aloud. "I wanted them to die. I hated them. She drowned in the tub. I didn't stop it. He begged for help. I left him." Her sins, secrets she had buried even from herself, lined the stairwell like murals. Then the staircase ended in a circular chamber, lit by flickering red candles. In the center stood a mirror, identical to the one in the cabin. This time, it reflected something else. Not her, but her grandmother, alive, crying. Behind her were figures in robes, chanting. The mirror whispered, "This is the origin." Watch, and it forced her to see. Her grandmother, Eliza as a child, now understanding fully, stood before the altar in the cabin, surrounded by masked villagers. They spoke in tongues. They offered her a choice: leave the hollow forever or accept the legacy. Her grandmother chose to stay, to protect others from what slept beneath the woods. But over time it corrupted her. The hollow always wins. The mirror cracked, and Eliza was thrust back into the present, the floor gone, falling again through layers of ash and time. She landed in the cabin's living room. Night again. Her phone buzzed. A final message. "The cycle ends with you." She turned. The masked ones were inside now. One stepped forward, removed its mask. It was her own face, dead, hollow-eyed, smiling. "We've been waiting," it said. "Come see what you become." Then it lunged. Everything went dark. The moment the mirror version of Eliza lunged at her, the world fractured like glass under pressure. She didn't feel an impact, only an unraveling, like her very being was pulled through a sieve of memories and shadows. When sensation returned, she was lying on a stone floor, slick with moisture, breathing in thick air that reeked of mildew and decay. The ceiling above her writhed with roots, pulsing like veins. and the only light came from bioluminescent fungi clinging to the walls. She was underground now, beneath the hollow, in a place no map marked, where time dripped like sap and silence had weight. Her clothes were damp. Her hands were covered in a black residue that wasn't dirt, but something older, something alive. The silence shattered when she heard it. Whispers, not in English, not even in a language she recognized, but still she understood. She is near. She has seen. She must become. A cold wind, though no tunnels led outside, swept across the corridor. The roots above her shifted, and in the space ahead, figures began to emerge. Not walking, but wriggling through the very walls like insects leaving a hive. They were tall, their limbs disproportionate, heads cocked at wrong angles. Masks still covered their faces, but now the wood was cracked, leaking the same black ichor that coated her skin. One of them reached toward her, and as its fingers brushed her cheek, she was flooded with memory. Not her own. A memory of being buried alive in ritual, chanting voices sealing her fate. Of waking centuries later, not human, not dead, but hollow, an echo given flesh. The creature withdrew, and in its place stood the child again. The girl in the white dress holding the faceless doll. "You're not running anymore," the girl said. "Good. Now they'll show you." Eliza wanted to run, scream, claw her way back to the surface, but her legs wouldn't move. The girl took her hand and led her deeper into the roots, past carvings in the stone that depicted spirals, sacrifices, and a tree with eyes instead of leaves. "Long ago," the girl whispered, "there were those who lived in the hollow and those who fed it. You're both now." They entered a grand cavern where a tree grew from the center, massive and skeletal, its bark black and slick, its branches twitching. Its roots were everywhere, and from those roots hung bodies like fruit. Some twitched, some wept. All were silent, faces she recognized, her old friends, her grandmother, her own. One of the faces opened its eyes. "Help me," it mouthed. Eliza screamed. The tree reacted, its branches reaching down as if to cradle her. But before they touched her, a bell tolled. Once, twice. The cavern shook. The masked ones retreated into the walls. The tree recoiled, and the girl stepped forward, smiling with rows of teeth too sharp for her small face. "You're waking up," she said, "but the roots are in you now." Eliza blinked and found herself in her car. It was morning. Ashford Hollow was behind her. Her hands were clean. The GPS blinked. 300 miles to Chicago. No sign of the cabin, no masked figures, no burning church. But her rear-view mirror reflected something different. In it, she was smiling, but she wasn't. The smile widened on its own. Her reflection winked. The radio switched on. Static at first, then the lullaby. She reached to turn it off, but her hands moved on their own. Her foot pressed harder on the gas. The trees lining the highway blurred together, forming not forest, but faces. Thousands of them, all masked, watching, and behind them, the tree, taller than the sky, alive and hungry. Eliza drove for hours without realizing it, hypnotized by the white lines on the road and the static lullaby echoing from the radio. Her reflection in the rearview mirror no longer mirrored her movements. It blinked when she didn't, it smirked when she trembled, and worst of all, it whispered things she couldn't understand. But her bones did. When she finally pulled over, she found herself on a dirt road shrouded in fog, with no cell signal, no GPS reading, and no memory of turning off the highway. The trees stood like silent witnesses on either side, and in front of her loomed the rusted "Welcome to Ashford Hollow" sign, tilted and overgrown. She slammed her hands against the steering wheel in disbelief. She had left. She had escaped. But something had brought her back. Or worse, she had never left at all. As she stepped out of the car, the air changed. Heavier, charged with a strange electricity. Her ears popped. Birds flew backwards above her. The clouds swirled in unnatural spirals. And then she saw the path. Not the road she'd arrived on, but a freshly carved trail through the woods lined with totems, bones, branches, masks, and symbols drawn in blood. With no choice and her legs moving as if possessed, she followed. The deeper she walked, the more the woods warped. Trees grew impossibly tall, their trunks spiraling like corkscrews. Roots moved of their own volition. Whispers followed her, crawling up her spine. And then the trees parted and the cabin stood before her again, whole, untouched, as if nothing had happened. The porch was clean, the windows unbroken. The door creaked open on its own. Her feet moved toward it, her lungs squeezed tight, and as she stepped inside, she felt time collapse again. The walls flickered between pristine wood and rotting flesh. The floor became a canvas of screaming faces. The mirror stood where it always had, covered now by a dark cloth. And beside it, the girl. She wasn't a girl anymore. She was taller now, older, her face stretched, her eyes voids. "You've been gone a while," she said with a voice like rust. "But now it's time to remember." Eliza tried to speak, but her mouth filled with dirt. Her reflection pulled off the cloth, revealing not glass, but a window into another realm. In it, she saw herself standing in the woods, but split. One version of her wore her grandmother's necklace, smiling sweetly. The other was bloodied, eyes black, mouth sewn shut. "They need you to choose," the girl whispered. "Which one stays? Which one feeds?" The mirror pulsed. Her hands rose. She didn't know why. Her fingers reached into the glass and gripped both versions of herself by the throat. The forest howled outside. The house groaned. Roots burst through the floor, wrapping around her ankles. In her ears, the lullaby returned, slower now, backwards. Her heart beat in rhythm with it. She had to choose. One version began to plead, voice trembling, begging to live. The other only stared, silent and accepting. She looked into their eyes and realized the silent one remembered everything. The rituals, the sacrifice, the screams, and she had survived it all. Eliza let go of the pleading version. The mirror cracked. The house screamed. The trees outside bent toward the cabin as if watching. The chosen reflection smiled and stepped through the glass, becoming whole. Eliza collapsed. The cabin was gone. She was in a clearing, alone. But inside her, something had changed. The roots were deeper now, the hunger stronger. And in the distance, the bells began to toll again. Once, twice, 3 times. And with each toll, something crawled closer through the woods. The sound of the bells echoed through the woods, each strike resonating like a heartbeat from the earth's rotten core. Eliza lay still on the moss-covered clearing, the memory of the mirror's cold grip lingering in her bones. Around her, the forest had grown unnaturally silent. No wind, no birds, not even the rustle of leaves. Only the bell. Its toll carried weight. It stirred things beneath the soil, awoke what had been waiting. She rose slowly, her joints creaking, her breath visible even in the summer air. Something was wrong with the light. The sun hung above but offered no warmth. The sky was gray but not with clouds, more like ash suspended in time. She tried to retrace her steps, to leave the hollow, but the woods had shifted again. The trees were closer now, their bark pulsing faintly, almost breathing. Vines reached for her, lazily, as if curious whether she was still prey or already claimed. She stumbled forward until she found a path, one she hadn't seen before. On either side were lanterns, old and rusted, but lit with a dim green flame that cast twisted shadows. She followed. With every step, the bell tolled again, and with every toll, she heard voices. Distant at first, whispers like wind through dead leaves, but they grew louder. Names, laughter, screams, her own voice among them, shouting words she didn't remember speaking. After what felt like hours, the path opened into a circular grove, surrounded by dead trees bent inward like ancient sentinels. In the center stood a stone well, blackened with age, chained shut with symbols etched into each link. Around the well, hooded figures stood motionless, their robes made of stitched-together leaves, skin, and shadows. One of them stepped forward. Its face was not a face, just smooth skin stretched where eyes and mouth should be. But it spoke clearly into her mind. "The Hollow remembers." Another toll. The figure raised a gnarled hand, and the chains around the well rattled. The ground beneath her feet cracked. "You have seen the mirror. You have chosen the survivor. But one must still feed. From the shadows something crawled forth. It wore her shape, her skin, but moved like a puppet with tangled strings. Its head tilted too far. Its limbs twitched with every bell. You left her behind, the figure said. She remembers the hunger. She remembers what you gave her. The doppelganger lunged, but the hooded figures held it back with whispered incantations. Eliza backed away, but the trees closed behind her. She was trapped. The bell tolled again. To be free, the figure continued, you must complete what was started. Feed the hollow, or be consumed by what crawls beneath it. The ground shook. From under the well, hands began to emerge. Small, clawed, bone white. Children's hands, grasping, reaching, hundreds. Eliza screamed. The shadows around her danced. Her reflection hissed, its face peeling back to reveal something ancient underneath. You fed it once, it growled. One more and you're free. The bell rang a final time. 12 strikes. Midnight. The well erupted. From its depths surged a torrent of black smoke, filled with eyes and teeth and voices, all crying her name. The hooded figures knelt. The forest bowed. And Eliza realized this had always been the purpose. Her return, her survival, her mirror. She was not a visitor. She was the offering. And deep within, she felt the hunger awaken. Eliza didn't remember falling. One moment she stood at the edge of the well, surrounded by hooded worshippers and the dark mimic of herself, and the next she was beneath it, beneath everything. There was no sky, no forest, no air. Only a suffocating vastness, like being buried alive inside a nightmare. She floated in a cavernous abyss, lit by the dull orange glow of hundreds of candles suspended in midair, their flames unmoving as if time itself had paused. The walls were covered in carvings. Children, mothers, forests, altars, and always, always the mirror. At the far end of the abyss, a massive stone figure emerged from the black, a statue of a twisted god, carved with too many mouths, each one gnashing, each one whispering. In its hands it held two versions of Eliza. One cried, bound in chains. The other grinned wide, her eyes completely black. The statue's mouth spoke in unison. You fed the hollow once. You must feed it again, or be devoured. She tried to scream, but her throat burned. Shadows slithered around her like snakes in water, wrapping her limbs, lifting her up until she faced the mirror again. It hung in the air without support, the frame made of bone, the glass shifting like mercury. Inside the mirror, she saw every version of herself, some living lives she had never known, others trapped in forests, drowning in wells, burning inside cabins, all of them screaming, all of them dying. You are the fragment that escaped, the mirror hissed, but nothing escapes forever. One reflection pressed its hand against the glass, then passed through, stepping into her world. It smiled, it walked away, it left her behind. The other versions followed. One by one, they exited the mirror and vanished into the world above. The final one turned and looked at her. It was the girl from the cabin, the original, the survivor. You chose me, she said. Now you pay the price. The mirror shattered. Eliza fell again. When she woke, she was in a house, but not the cabin. This one was suburban, modern, filled with photographs of a happy family she didn't recognize. She heard children playing outside. Birds chirped. The sun shone. But none of it felt real. She looked in the mirror hanging in the hallway. Her reflection didn't match her movements. It blinked out of sync. It mouthed a word she couldn't hear. She touched the frame. The hallway darkened. The birds went silent. The floor beneath her rippled like water. She opened a door and found herself in the woods again. The hollow had followed her, or she had never left. She ran through the trees, desperate to find anything familiar. But the deeper she went, the more twisted the forest became. Trees with human eyes, rocks that bled, a path lined with children's shoes. And then, the bell tolled. Once, twice, a dozen times. The forest split open. The well stood in the center again. This time it wasn't chained. It was open. A girl stood beside it, barefoot, in a white dress stained with mud. She looked up. It was her, or something wearing her skin. You were supposed to forget, the girl said, but the hollow never lets go. Eliza stepped back, heart pounding. Her reflection rose from the well, soaked in black, crawling like a spider, smiling wider than a human face should allow. There's only room for one, the reflection said. You chose the hollow. Now it chooses you. Hands burst from the ground, pulling her to her knees. The forest wailed. The sky burned. The mirror rebuilt itself midair, piece by piece, and as it reformed, it showed a scene. A new girl in a town far away, stepping into an old house, finding a strange mirror in the attic. The cycle had begun again. Eliza screamed as the hollow consumed her. Not her body, but everything else. Her memories, her identity, her soul. In the world above, the reflection smiled and stepped into her life, wearing her face, speaking her voice. Nobody noticed the change. Nobody ever did. The other Eliza, if it could be called that, stepped into town with the ease of someone who belonged. She remembered every detail, every smile, every friend. She walked through the world as Eliza Morrow, and no one questioned it. Not her co-workers, not her family, not her friends. Because this thing, this shadow-given skin, wore her so convincingly. But beneath the surface, the hollow seethed. At first it was small things. A pet dog snarling and backing away. Mirrors that cracked without reason. Children crying when she entered a room. The real Eliza, the one who had been devoured by the hollow, still clung to some fractured echo of herself. From within the mirror world, she watched the imposter living her life, slowly unraveling everything she had built. The other Eliza didn't care for her students the way the real one had. She forgot birthdays. She snapped at her mother. She didn't cry at her father's grave. It was as if something deeply, disturbingly wrong was beginning to rot through the seams of the stolen existence. One night, the reflection Eliza stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom. It was just a regular mirror now, or at least that's what it appeared to be. But she stared into it for hours, whispering words in a language no one taught her. The glass trembled, fogged, and then revealed the true Eliza, trapped behind the surface, her mouth sewn shut with shadow thread, her eyes pleading. The reflection smiled. Soon, it whispered, we'll open the gate again. And the hollow stirred. Across town, the girl from the beginning, the teenager who had found the cabin, who had seen Eliza vanish, couldn't sleep. Annie was her name, Annie Calhoun, and she remembered what most would forget, because the hollow had touched her, even briefly, and its stain never truly faded. She saw things, heard whispers. Her dreams were full of doors she couldn't open and faces that weren't hers. One night, she heard the bell, not in town, not on TV, in her room, the bell from the woods. It tolled once, loud enough to crack her window pane. She followed the sound through the night. It led her not to the forest, but to Eliza's house. She hadn't dared to go near since the incident, but something pulled her forward. She peeked through the window and saw Eliza, or the thing pretending to be her, floating inches above the ground, surrounded by flickering candles, her mouth moving, but no sound escaping. In her hands, she held a shard of the mirror, slick with blood. Annie ran, but the hollow marked her that night. It followed, in reflections, in puddles, in the glint of her phone screen. Eliza's face whispering backward speech, mouthing her name over and over again. And Annie realized the truth. The hollow didn't just take people, it multiplied. It was a virus, a hunger that spread through reflection and memory. It needed hosts, and it had chosen her. Meanwhile, in the mirror world, the real Eliza gathered what little will she had left. The agony of separation, of watching her life rot and twist, had pushed her to the edge of insanity. But there was one weakness in the hollow. It thrived on silence, on secrecy. And now a witness, Annie, existed. That changed everything. Eliza's shadow mouth tore free of its thread. She screamed, the sound so powerful it shattered the illusions around her. The glass shook. The mirror cracked. In the world above, every mirror in Eliza's home shattered at once. The reflection, Eliza screamed, collapsing to the ground. The hollow recoiled. Eliza was breaking through. For the first time, the door worked in both directions. But freedom came at a cost. In order to cross, Eliza would have to leave something behind. Something essential. A piece of herself. A memory. Or perhaps someone. And she knew exactly what had to be done. She began to tear at her own reflection, pulling at the false images, the manipulated memories, until the mirror bled with truth. Meanwhile, Annie, too afraid to return to Eliza's home, instead sought out the only person who might believe her, the old woman in town who had once warned about the woods. Mrs. Hendricks. The townspeople thought she was crazy, but Annie remembered her words. The hollow isn't a place, it's a hunger, and once it sees you, it doesn't forget. Mrs. Hendricks lived alone, surrounded by salt lines and shattered mirrors. When Annie told her what she saw, the woman's eyes filled with tears. It's beginning again, she said, and this time, it won't stop with one. Deep beneath the skin of the world, the hollow laughed. It had many mouths, and all of them were hungry. The storm arrived at midnight without warning, crashing down from the mountains like an ancient beast roused from centuries of sleep. Thunder cracked the sky apart, lightning split trees in the forest behind Ashford Lane, and in the eye of the storm stood Eliza Morrow's shattered house, pulsing with a dark, unnatural glow that no one else could see, except those marked by the hollow. Annie stood at the edge of the woods, clutching the ritual charm Mrs. Hendricks had forced into her hand. Salt, bone dust, mirror shards. This will burn it, the old woman had said, but only if you get close enough to its heart. Annie didn't want to go back, but the dreams had become unbearable. Her own reflection laughing at her, calling her name from ponds, from spoons, from car windows. Her shadow moved on its own now. The hollow had touched her, and if she didn't act, it would consume her like it had Eliza. She stepped into the trees. The wind died instantly, as if the forest were holding its breath. There were no sounds, no birds, no insects. Only a low, vibrating hum that came from nowhere and everywhere. The deeper she walked, the older the woods felt. Bark stretched like skin. Trees leaned together to whisper secrets. The air was thick with the smell of rotting memories. Then she saw the house. The real house. The one buried in time and shadow. The one Eliza had been pulled into. It stood in the hollow's heart, identical to the real one, but twisted. Its windows were black holes. Its porch sagged under invisible weight, and its door stood open. Eliza waited inside, not the imposter, but the real one, her eyes bleeding light, her hands trembling with rage and sorrow. She had crossed over. She had fought her way back from the mirror world by sacrificing pieces of herself. Memories of her father's voice, the taste of her favorite tea, the name of her first love, all gone. But she remembered the hollow, and she remembered Annie. You shouldn't have come, Eliza whispered, her voice layered with echoes. It sees you now. It already does, Annie replied. We can end it. I have the charm. Eliza reached for it, but the house groaned, and the walls pulsed like lungs. From the shadows, the other Eliza emerged, no longer pretending. Its eyes were bottomless, its smile too wide. It moved like smoke and spiders. You can't kill what was never alive, it hissed. You are all just broken reflections. The hollow shows you what you truly are. It lunged. Eliza shoved Annie aside and tackled the thing that had worn her face. They crashed into a mirror that hadn't been there seconds ago, and suddenly Eliza was back in the reflection world, fighting herself, memory against memory. The mirror cracked. Annie screamed, grabbing the charm, hurling it into the air. It exploded in a blinding flash of salt and shattered glass. The hollow screamed, not from pain, but from fury. It began to collapse. The house groaned, walls folding inward like pages. The woods howled, ripping apart with wind and fire. Annie was thrown backward, landing hard outside the tree line, just as the entire forest seemed to vanish in a blink. Morning came like nothing had happened. The house was gone. The trees were still. The town woke up with no memory of Eliza Morrow. Her house was an empty lot. Her name didn't appear on school rosters. No photos, no documents. Only Annie remembered. She found herself walking to the library weeks later, drawn by a flicker in the corner of her eye. There, behind a cracked mirror in the basement, was a photo pinned to the wall. Eliza, smiling with the words "missing since 1986" beneath. Annie turned, and in the mirror, her reflection did not turn with her. It smiled and whispered, "The hollow never forgets." Then the lights went out,